So first of all, good afternoon again, and thank you so much for joining us. I'm Maria Genovese, and I am with Sustainable Westchester, and we are so pleased today to be able to facilitate this webinar. It is a webinar, which means that you are all visible to each other. It is a Zoom meeting rather, not a webinar, which means that you are all visible to each other and you are visible to our speakers today, just letting you know. It would be tremendous if you could do us a favor, please, and ensure that when our speakers are presenting, if you could put yourselves on mute, that'd be fabulous. And when the questions and answers come at the 1 o'clock time frame, you're all welcome to put your videos back on if they're not already, and you're also free to unmute yourselves. But please, if you wouldn't mind, be conscious of background noise. So today we would like to thank our event host, the Westchester County Association, for all of their work, for making this event possible for us, and for playing such a tremendous role in the clean heating and cooling and clean energy arena for the business community here in Westchester. We also would like to thank our partners, NYSERDA, Con Ed, Stone Environmental, and Goldman Copeland. If you take a look at the next slide, please, you'll see an agenda for today's meeting. We do, as I said, have a great deal to accomplish. We are not actually starting off our meeting this morning with County Executive Latimer. In fact, he will be joining us a little bit late. So we will, in fact, start off with our first speaker, who is Michael Romita, the president of the WCA Association. And before I turn this over to Michael, I did want to ask you all to hold your questions to the end, if you could. And or importantly, it would be great if you could drop them into the chat feature here on the Zoom. And as you're dropping in your questions, it would help us a great deal if you indicated the person to whom you'd like your question addressed. We will curate those questions at the 1 o'clock hour. But if other questions come up and you hadn't had the chance to drop them into the chat, we will address them as time allows at 1 o'clock. And so now I am going to get going by passing this to Michael and thanking him and the WCA again for being with us today and providing such an important role. Michael?
Thanks, Maria, and thanks to Sustainable Westchester and the folks at NYSERDA for putting this together. I'm going to ask Fiona to give me screen sharing capabilities unless she wants to navigate through that. There we go. And I will call up my screen to share my presentation. Go. Okay, so I'm the president and CEO of the Westchester County Association. I know most of you tuning in were expecting to see George leading off, but he's been delayed. He'll probably be joining us in about a half an hour. So you're stuck with me for the time being. And I'm going to give a brief set of comments to sort of frame the discussion today as we turn it over to NYSERDA to talk about their brand new GeoPossibilities tool. For those of you who aren't familiar with the WCA, we are Westchester County's professional roundtable. We're dedicated to smart growth and advocating for a robust economic environment for businesses, nonprofits, and all of the residents of Westchester County and the surrounding region. And we have made clean energy and sustainability in business one of our primary policy planks. We've identified this issue as one of the foundational pillars of rebuilding our economy in the wake of the COVID-19 pandemic. So why is the GeoPossibilities tool so important, and how does it fit into our current policy discussion? And there's quite a bit going on. If you look at things at the national level, President Biden has a stated agenda of having greenhouse gas emissions in the power sector within the next decade, and then being completely carbon neutral by 2050. This is a tall order, particularly because we have an incredibly divided Congress where it's very difficult to get any legislation passed, much less major environmental legislation or Clean Air Act legislation. But that doesn't mean that there aren't vessels and vehicles available to the president and the administration. He certainly has executive orders, and he's issued a number of those. In fact, his first day in office, he issued an executive order which reversed all of the executive orders on greenhouse gases that were put in place by the prior administration. He's also set a budget and infrastructure agenda that enhances clean energy technology and tries to move the country to a more sustainable future. And that's just essentially the power of the purse. He also has administrative rulemakings, obviously, because the EPA is part of his administration. And that is another non-legislation driven vessel for advancing and enhancing these goals. And of course, he has international engagement, rejoining the Paris Accord and trying to rebuild the country's credibility on the international stage as he seeks concessions from our international partners. Now, closer to home, New York State actually has an even more aggressive agenda when it comes to pivoting towards a clean energy future. Under the Climate Leadership and Community Protection Act that was passed 2 years ago, the goal, which is now codified in the state of New York, is 100% zero emissions electricity by 2040 and total reductions in greenhouse gas emissions in the state of New York, 85% decline by 2050. This is now the most aggressive climate policy in the country, and perhaps one of the most ambitious climate policies, frankly, anywhere in the world. So if we're to get serious about our energy and climate challenges, the next several years will be pivotal for Westchester. We will need to integrate environmental policy with economic development, private capital investment, and job creation. And frankly, businesses will need to get with the program. In the private sector, corporate sustainability is no longer a peripheral interest to be addressed with platitudes or tertiary pilot projects. Our private organizations that continue to ignore the impacts of climate change and other aspects of social responsibility in their core strategic planning increasingly do so at their own peril. The evidence is all around us, and we need look no further than what has happened in the last 18 months with COVID. This is not a black swan event. And for those of you who pore over scientific journals or business journals, there was a recent study that was co-authored by some guy named Dr. Fauci. You may have heard of him, which lays the responsibility for pandemics such as COVID-19 right on what's happening with climate change. So this is going to continue to happen with more frequency and regularity until and unless we adapt to a clean energy future. Now, let's just say you're not feeling particularly altruistic and you have a bottom line to meet because you run a business. Well, if you're acting purely out of self-interest, the evidence is also there to embrace environmentalism and sustainability. It means taking the long view, and it's good for the bottom line. What you see on the left side of the screen are the results of a McKinsey study, which was a meta-analysis of over 2,000 other studies, 63 of which concluded that adapting ESG is good for equity returns, and only 8% of those studies showed that pivoting to an ESG proposition could have a deleterious effect on the bottom line of a company. If that wasn't enough, think about shifting generational attitudes. And what you see on the right side of my screen is a graph that shows what's happening with the younger generation. The fact is that the younger you are, the millennials, the Gen Xers, and the Gen Zers want to buy from, invest in, and work for companies that embrace sustainable policies and want to work towards a clean energy future. And the GeoPossibilities tool that we're going to discuss today is just one of the tools that's available to help us along this journey. And there are many others. So one of the things that my association has done, the Westchester County Association, is partner with Pace University's Energy and Climate Center right here in Westchester to curate a dynamic search tool, essentially an information and incentive navigator to help businesses who want to explore what they can do for their own operations. And I'm going to try and get that up on my screen so I can show you in real time what that is. Okay, so this is now live on the Westchester County Association's website at www.westchester.org. and it's our Clean Energy Program portal. So this is a dynamic searchable engine. I'm just going to demo this very quickly for folks out there. So let's just say you're running a business and you want to learn what incentives are out there for taxes to help you pivot. So you can click on that tab, and this will give you a list that was created by PACE and the experts at PACE to all of the government and public programs that are available to provide tax incentives for clean energy. And if you click through to one of these, you have this annotation. It gives you a sense of whether your business or facility is eligible. And then there are hot links to the primary source areas. I'm going to go back through this to show you exactly what we have for the search engine. So let's just say you're not sure what you're looking for, but you've heard about geothermal. I'm going to type this in. And you want to see what programs are out there for geothermal. Oh, look at that. What a coincidence. The first thing listed here is Westchester's GeoPossibilities tool. Okay. And if we click through, again, you've got this annotation that was put together by the experts at PACE, and you can click through directly to a NYSERDA's website and explore everything you want to learn about the GeoPossibilities tool. So I hope that people get some use out of this new tool that we have put together with PACE on the WCA website, and I hope it gets quite a bit of use. Okay. With that, I'm going to turn things over to Scott Smith at NYSERDA to talk a little bit about the work that they're doing over there with the GeoPossibilities tool. Thanks everybody for tuning in.
Thanks a lot, Michael. The portal is exciting. Really appreciate you showing that to everybody. And I'll echo the thanks that Maria gave you earlier for co-hosting this meeting and for joining us today. I'm just going to provide, and for giving you did a great job of giving a lot of the why context, like why do we care about heat pumps and electrification. I'm going to do a little bit more of that, and then I'll turn it over to Dave Hermanton, who's going to talk about the what of ground source heat pumps, and then we'll talk about the tool itself. So Fiona, next slide. So you mentioned, Michael, there's this Climate Act in New York that was passed a couple of years ago. You mentioned it's the most aggressive climate legislation in the country. Couple of things I wanted to point out here, and then I'm going to talk about how it relates to electrification. So we're going to have zero carbon electricity by 2040. It's a whole team of people at NYSERDA and elsewhere in state government that are working to make that happen. Once you have carbon-free electricity, the way to get to a carbon-free economy is to electrify end uses that currently use carbon-intensive fuels. So that's what we're doing. I'll just quickly mention the Climate Act also has some excellent and very important commitments to environmental justice and disadvantaged communities and a just transition to make sure that the workforce of today becomes the workforce of tomorrow. There's a Climate Action Council that's actually putting together the plan. How do we implement these things right now? And I encourage you all to engage in that process, that Climate Action Council process. Next slide. Just a little bit more on the numbers. I'm not going to run through these, but again, the plan is make electricity carbon free and then electrify the end uses. Next slide. And this slide is a little busy, but it's one of the slides that was presented to the Climate Action Council that shows some of the pathways to get to the goals in the Climate Act. And it's sort of this is reinforcing that notion, or showing the notion of electrify make the grid carbon neutral and electrify end uses. And in order to get there by 2030, 50 to 70% of the sales of heating systems in New York need to be heat pumps, and by 2050, 95 to 100% of the sales need to be heat pumps. Next slide. So in order to inform the Climate Action Council, NYSERDA is working on a couple of other roadmaps. We have a carbon neutral buildings roadmap that we're working on right now. That's a longer term view. It looks at 2050. How do we get to the end stage that we need to get at? And then there's a shorter term look specifically, and that's carbon neutral buildings, right, beyond electrification. And then there's a building electrification roadmap electrification being a huge part of decarbonizing buildings. That's going to come out this fall. That's going to be a 10-year strategy through 2030. How do we get where we need to be by 2030? And I'll just say, as we look downfield through these roadmaps, it's becoming clearer and clearer that the end state that we need to see in 2050 is a very large portion of New York, all of New York State's buildings on heat pumps, and a very large portion of those on ground source heat pumps. If all of the buildings converted to air source heat pumps, the grid would be an unmanageably large size that would be unsupportable by public funding or private funding. And so I think that might be my last slide, just to confirm, Fiona. Yeah, so I'm going to turn it over to Will Jha. He's going to provide some additional context, but I'll just close by saying we developed this tool in collaboration with the team that you'll hear from later. The intent of the tool is to be able to give businesses in Westchester County an early look at what a ground source heat pump system would look like in their building. And then there's other resources like a free screening or a cost shared flex tech study that can help those customers take the next step and get to the point where they can actually make a decision on whether or not to invest in ground source heat pumps. So with that, I'll turn it over to Will.
Thanks, Scott. And thank you for having me today, folks from Sustainable Westchester, as well as the Westchester County Association. I did want to just continue the conversation where Scott had left off, right? I am the electrification lead from the Energy Efficiency and Demand Management Group at Con Edison. I'm also one of the 2 co-chairs of the statewide Clean Heat program, which administers utility incentives towards eligible heat pump equipment. We very much want to help the state as well as Westchester advance the clean energy goals through heat pump technologies and with a particular focus towards geothermal. Next slide, please. So just a quick, what I'd like to talk about today, there is my contact information in case anyone wants to reach out to me with regards to potential projects. I do want to give a quick update towards new and increased incentives that Con Edison will be offering in Westchester. And I did want to just end with program resources, right? For people that are curious as to how to engage with the program, how to submit projects, and ultimately how to receive financial incentives for installed projects. Next slide, please. So here's a summary of a couple of changes and additions that Con Edison is rolling out that will affect installations in Westchester. Primarily, the main change is in the Category 3 or incentive towards ground source heat pump installations. We have significantly increased our incentive towards those installs. It has now gone from $2,850 per 10,000 BTUH of heating capacity to $5,000 per 10,000 BTUH of heating capacity. We really want to further support the expansion of ground source installations in Westchester. Scott mentioned issues with the grid, issues with ensuring that enough customers are adequately supplied with clean energy. This is us trying to provide additional incentive to accelerate the installation of geothermal systems. The other main point is that we are looking to significantly increase our incentives for larger custom applications, right? So for commercial buildings or larger buildings that don't quite have a quote unquote prescriptive heat pump pathway, but rather have something specific in terms of process or technology combination, we have increased those incentives to $200 per MMBTU. And we've also rolled out a new offering that combines both the heat pump and weatherization measures, or heat pump plus envelope. And we are looking to significantly increase the incentives behind projects there. Lastly, on top of all that, we are looking to apply an additional incentive, a 30% kicker on top of most heat pumps installed within gas-constrained areas. There are several neighborhoods in Westchester that are affected by that. We do want to further promote electrification alternatives for our customers that currently cannot receive a natural gas solution. Next slide, please. this is my last slide, just a quick recap. The links are here, and I'm assuming these will be shared after, but I wanted to leave you with a couple of resources in case of interest in the program. We are including a new savings and incentive calculator for large projects. We have been hearing about a lot of pain points when it comes to estimating the amount of incentives that larger projects can receive. We have rolled out a new calculator that is user-friendly and can help with that upfront estimation when people have potential projects. There's a link to the Excel workbook. There's a link to the user guide as to how to navigate that. I've also included additional resources here where you can find additional information about the incentives as well as how to participate, as well as a couple more details, right? We have enacted a new monthly webinar for participating contractors and industry partners. We really do want to hear from all of our stakeholders as to how we can make this program better. Our next meeting is Thursday, August 12th. And these are the 2 email addresses in case anyone has any inquiries, right? Any program specific inquiries, as well as any project specific inquiries. So we do welcome your participation. And again, thank you for the opportunity to continue working with the Westchester community. With that, I'll turn it over to our next speaker, Dave Hermanton from Brightcore, who will go a little bit more in detail about the geothermal. Thank you.
Thanks, Will. Yeah, again, my name is Dave Hermanton. I'm Vice President of Renewable Heating and Cooling over at Brightcore Energy. And my group specializes in geothermal for large commercial applications and large multifamily buildings. And also we're happy to be the sole provider of urban geo just through our relationship, our strategic partnership with LCAP Vassara. Provides new opportunities to install geothermal in the New York City, Westchester area for large commercial buildings. Next slide. I'm going to talk a bit about, I guess, kind of, one of the whys about geothermal heat pumps and specifically the efficiency that they provide. I guess it's important to provide a definition of one of the measures of efficiency, which is coefficient of performance. Coefficient of performance is the ratio of useful heating and cooling. And the way I'm demonstrating this is with these graphics that on the left-hand side is an electric resistance heater, which most of us are familiar with. That type of heating, you plug it into the wall, and that type of heater converts electricity directly to thermal energy, and it uses all the electricity and it's 100% efficient. So that defines the coefficient of performance at 1. Now heat pumps, I'm not going to talk about sort of the magic of heat pumps, what goes on inside of them, but many of us know that they boost heat. They're able to extract heat from the environment around them and then boost it up. And in the middle graphic, you can see a condensing unit from an air source heat pump. And that air source heat pump on an annual basis is able to take the 1 unit of electricity and provide 2.5 units of heat on average annually. On the right-hand side, there's a graphic which is a building, and it shows a cutaway of a closed loop geothermal system next to the building. And interesting, or what's special about geothermal systems is that they're very efficient. So compared to a resistance heater, they are about 4 times more efficient, or have a coefficient of performance of 4 or 400% annually. So you can see why this technology is of a lot of interest to New York State and to Con Edison, based on what Scott and Will were talking about. They're much less dependent on the grid, and for people who use them, they're a lot less energy intensive. Can we go to the next slide? So this slide shows on an annual basis, on a peak basis, how ground source heat pumps shine. During the coldest days of the year, you'll see on the left-hand side that air source heat pumps, they work really good. Not knocking air source heat pumps. They're about 170% efficient, but ground source heat pumps are about 360% efficient. And these values change depending on temperature, but ground source heat pumps are generally designed not to go lower than that coefficient of performance. Next slide. This shows a cutaway of a large building with a ground source heat pump installed beneath it. And it shows a winter and summer scenario. And this helps visualize the efficiencies that these systems provide. So you can see during the real cold winter days when it's 25 degrees outside, air source heat pumps have to draw energy from that air, while ground source heat pumps are drawing energy from the ground, which the average annually, the temperature of the ground is about 55 degrees. And conversely, in the summertime, it's easier for these systems to reject heat to the ground compared to the outside, particularly on summer days like today when it's 85 outside. It's much easier to reject heat to 55-degree Earth. And that all is what really makes these systems super efficient. Next slide. And finally, these are just some buildings in Westchester County that have ground source heat pump systems. On the upper left, that is Bronxville Village Hall. On the upper right, the Hackley Middle School. On the lower left, in Yonkers, the John Flynn Manor building. On the lower left is the Pace University Pleasantville campus. So these systems are not super duper, I guess, common, but they're out there. And last slide. Lastly, yeah, if you have any questions about geothermal, reach out and contact me. I love talking about it. And you know, I guess I can answer questions at the end as well as everybody else. Thank you.
So I am going to hop back in, and I don't believe that the county executive has joined us yet, although he was expecting to about 12:30. So we're going to continue on. And I believe, Warren, you are in fact up next. Please.
Great. Thanks, Maria. Hi, everyone. My name is Warren Rich. I'm a project GIS specialist at Stone Environmental. We led the project team to develop GeoPossibilities over the course of the past year and a half to 2 years it's been now. So we're very excited to get to this point and see it launched to the public finally. Next slide. Yeah, so I wanted to definitely give a shout out to the whole project team. This was certainly not an effort that Stone did by any means alone. We worked together with Overmorgen, which is a Dutch company, Goldman Copeland, who we have Tristan here from, Flux Tailor, who we have Claire de Shepper here from as well, and Reiner Consulting. So we really brought a wide variety of expertise through this group of five consultants to this team to get us to the point where we're at today. Next slide. Yeah, so before we get to the tool, I wanted to just give a broad overview of the primary data sets that you will interact with the tool and that are also really driving the calculations, the results, and kind of the ultimate determination that this tool gives you in the end. So really the primary data set to start with, the use for this is the Westchester tax parcel data and boundaries. So that includes the geographic boundaries of all tax parcels within Westchester County, as well as a lot of the data points that came with the tax assessor role included with those boundaries. We were able to draw a lot of the necessary information needed from things like year built, fuel type used, parcel and building square footage. And we supplemented that with a private source called Datafinity, which provided a bit of extra kind of fill in the gaps information where things like, year built weren't as fully populated in the tax parcel data. We were able to supplement it from there to try and really fill out the data set to provide results for as many buildings as possible. The Westchester building footprints, as I was mentioning, that was the other key part to this. So it's really, this tool relies on a geographical analysis of parcel size and building size, and really more so the amount of space located between the building and the parcel for the implementation, particularly for existing buildings for implementing a geothermal system. So that was also obtained from the Westchester County GIS, as were the tax parcel boundaries. And we used Microsoft Bing has a footprints data set for, I know it's at least all of America, it might be beyond that. It's a remote sense data set. And where the Westchester County data set was lacking in that, we were able to fill in the gaps from there. And then the other key part was the geothermal energy and return on investment calculations and tool inputs that were provided by Goldman Copeland. So, you know, we could get the data we needed to get the initial inputs set into the calculator, the tool altogether, and then the behind the scenes calculations and what kind of takes those property data inputs and converts them into a meaningful determination were all developed and came from Goldman Copeland. Next slide. Okay, yeah, so here's a sneak peek of the tool. I thought I would go over kind of the key points and the primary workflows and what the tool, you know, ultimately does. There's a lot to be said about what the tool doesn't, but I think I'm covering this before we jump into the tool, hopefully provide a little bit of background. So yeah, users are provided the ability to explore geothermal feasibility results for existing properties, new construction sites, or multi-property clusters of high return on investment buildings. The existing properties is what would utilize the building footprints data set and the parcel boundaries. New construction, you're really just looking at parcels. You know, theoretically, there's not a building there yet for that purpose workflow, at least, even if it's, you know, an expansion or tearing down a building, it's kind of starting with a blank slate. And then the multi-property contractor option, we looked at, you know, clusters of feasible buildings with high return on investments to try and narrow in on, you know, these kind of hot spots rather than individual property lookup. So it's more of a higher level where, you know, where can, you know, maybe somebody looking to implement a lot or looking to find a lot of buildings to implement geothermal systems rather than a specific address would be useful for that. Yeah, so we start just with a basic address input. As you can see in the top right screenshot, that's worth the same for existing buildings or new construction. From there, following the input of your address, you will be taken to the buildings. You can see in this middle screenshot, you get a really initial congratulations, or, you know, maybe your building might not be feasible based on the metrics that we have for the building and the background calculations. From there, you can go to explore savings. If your building is not feasible, you will not go to explore savings. That would take you to kind of a learn more situation instead. But assuming it is feasible, you'll get the results with the all the different metrics and data outputs that are playing into this whole idea of feasibility or not feasible, based on this, again, high level kind of initial screening, based on information we know, and, you know, not necessarily considering information we don't know, which is why, again, to reiterate, this is kind of a first step in the process and isn't a definitive yes, no, whether your building is or is not feasible for a geothermal heat pump system. Oh yeah, and then I guess the other part, you can email the results to yourself, and as well as kind of following these links in the kind of right side of the results page that will take you to signups, contact flex tech contractors, get in contact with NYSERDA. It's the continue the conversation part following kind of your initial feasibility screen. Okay, and with that, I will hand it off to Tristan Schwartzman of Goldman Copeland to run through a demo of the tool. Thank you.
Good afternoon. So my name is Tristan Schwartzman. I run the energy department at Goldman Copeland. So I was involved with this tool as well as the one that was issued for New York City a couple of years back through the DDC and the Mayor's Office of Sustainability. So I'm just going to run through a couple of properties. I don't think it'll take too long, but just to show you guys how it'll work. And then from there, I think we'll go straight into questions. So any questions that arise as I'm going through it, you guys can hit us all with, and we'll spread them around. I believe that if I just share my screen, it will work. Okay. All right, looks like we're good. Okay, can somebody give me a thumbs up that you're seeing it flip from one to another? Fabulous. Okay, so I've got a bunch of tabs up there in case the process doesn't work, but I'm kind of going to cover a range of different buildings through with a focus on commercial office space and commercial type buildings. So the tool is pretty clever here. As long as I've more or less got the address right, it'll take me there. So the first one, this is 111 Dr. Martin Luther King Boulevard. If you look at it, we can move around this tool a little bit to see. This is a large commercial office building right in the middle of White Plains. It gives our result. It's not a good fit for a geothermal system. It's that kind of space where you have a very high heating and cooling load and very little space to build wells is a stretch to make it work. One thing that this tool does consider is whether a hybrid solution would work. So if the load is perhaps 60% or 70%, you can still put in heating and cooling to support the remaining 30%, and the geothermal will cover you most of the time and most of the load, even on the peak days. So from there, Dale Road. Oops. Okay. Now, this one I thought was interesting. So we've got this is a Bloomingdale's. It's a nice big building, but there's a nice large parking lot around it. And based on the tools output, which as Warren mentioned, it doesn't cover absolutely everything, but it's a first check to see if we've got potential. So we're told that it's a good fit. Now we get to this fine tune your information to find out how much you could save. So it's important, to note that you can take a look at these. We had the best data that we had available. But if you know that this building is 3 floors, or you know that this parcel has a little bit less space available, you can make that sort of adjustment here. Let's see. So, sorry. Okay. Now here is where we have the energy savings. So this is your estimated savings. If you flip over to geothermal at this space, it's a large building, so the savings are large. We've got a few pieces of information. This is the savings over the life of the system. And this is showing your annual savings until you reach the incremental cost increase. So what we're saying is that if you're going to upgrade the system anyway, and you opt to upgrade to a geothermal as opposed to a standard system, the increased cost is going to be in this range. And over the course of 8 years, the savings from moving forward with this improved system is going to make up that cost. We have some additional pieces of information down here. This just gives us the same information that we have here in number form. Down here, we've got the greenhouse gas emissions savings, which is becoming increasingly relevant. Here we have the closed loops that would be required. Again, everything's rough calculations, but this is the range we would expect for this type of building. Based on the year it was built, the size, the usage. And then the lot has a certain amount of loops that it would be feasible to install in that area. Okay, so then we have a cost to install a geothermal system versus a cost to fully replace the existing system. That's where you get your incremental savings that justify this purchase. All of this does not include current rebates. As we know, rebates are something that can change. They can go up, they can go down. They've recently gone up, but this tool is going to last longer than the exact rebate numbers that are available right now. So now moving into some of the things that we can change here. We can change the building type if we want to. As you flip this around, the numbers are adjusted. You can change the year built if you want to. It's not every year isn't going to have a change, but we have kind of pre-war type building is expected to have a certain efficiency versus 50s, 60s, 70s building versus a much more recent building. So that sometimes can lead to change. These are just corrections here. So, and then we have a few advanced settings that we can have. If you incorporate a building envelope upgrade, it's kind of an interesting little tidbit because the savings from the geothermal system go down because you're heating and cooling a lot less because your envelope is improved. But to be realistic, if you're doing less heating and cooling, then you're going to save less on heating and cooling. Occupancy rate is considered in here to have an impact on occupied spaces. And this is, I know, if we do have a lot of business people on the line here, if you have a 200,000 square foot commercial space, you would love for your occupancy rate to be 100% all the time, but maybe realistically, you're typically somewhere between 80 and 90%. And that's what you want to base your savings on. The other thing that we have in here is the heating fuel type. Probably a lot of the buildings are on fuel oil right now. If you're converting from fuel oil to this system, your savings are going to be a lot higher because fuel oil costs a lot more. That's as simple as that. So we just used current rates for heating systems. So there's just a few things that you can work around with in here. If you want to add an addition onto the facility and you want to see if you'll still be able to cover the whole building, we can change the gross square footage. Savings are going to go up. I'm going to save more money if I have a larger facility. The cost payback is not going to change because it's still the same usage type. We're still on the same assumptions because everything else is the same. So the relative energy savings to the square footage remains the same, but your dollar amount changes. All right. This is Warren had mentioned, you can send the results by email. I'm not going to have those for you right now, but you pop it in here and it'll come to you. And here you can move on if you want to move into no cost screening. So if you want to reach out to take advantage of the next offerings that the NYSERDA makes available. All right, let's see. Okay, and now let me go back here. All right. Just for interest, I wanted to throw up another kind of building type so you could look at it. 1 Roosevelt Place in Scarsdale. This is a school, right? Edgewood School. I know that one of the images that Dave Hermanton showed was a school where they have installed this solution. So these often are a really good location for a geothermal system because you do have a lot of open space typically. A thing to note that is incorporated into our calculations is the heating and cooling balance, but does need to be further studied. If you're doing a lot more heating than you are cooling, you need to be careful that you have sufficient extra capacity to maintain that. So again, we can explore the space. And again, we've got plenty of extra room here. Again, we have far more potential for loops than we have required loops, so we're very comfortable there. We have an incremental cost of the savings, and here we've got a payback period that's a little bit longer. This is based on operating hours to a large extent. for a school versus a commercial retail mall sort of situation. Again, we can change anything in here that we want. If we want to think about if we're adding an addition on, and that's why we're thinking about it, we can look at what happens in that case and if it's still a feasible alternative. Beyond that, most of the findings here are pretty much the same. As I look through this, I am going to move into a new construction example now, but it does look like we're going to have a little bit of extra time for questions. It looks like the chat's filling up pretty well, so I think that might be okay. No. Another example that I thought would be of interest is this building. So this is the new construction option, and again, new construction, but again, it's a preliminary tool so that we can have an idea for what we've got. 21 Bloomingdale Road, it plops you right here if you say new construction. If you take a look, this is 21 Bloomingdale Road. It's this entire area. It's this large hospital. We have a lot of experience with hospital spaces, adding on extensions, adding on additional wings, which is a great time to think of, even if you're not going to put in a full geothermal system for the entire hospital, it might be that since you are adding a new wing, adding an addendum, adding additional space, now might be a good time to think about putting geothermal on for that particular part. So you can go in here. In this case, it's a hospital and health facility, and say it's 4 floors, 80,000 square feet. You'll see here hospital savings are much higher than anywhere else. Hospitals heat and cool all year round. There's particular spaces that need very cold air. There's humidity control requirements. There's outside air requirements. There's a lot of health and safety protocols that end up mandating that these buildings tend to have cooling systems operating at least 10 months out of the year and heating systems typically running all year. So now there's some caveats here. Of course, we're getting a general idea. We do know that the space is available, but there are some of these data points are hard to identify for this. So we're just giving a rough idea. Exactly what the footprint of the proposed building is hard to identify, obviously, in a pre-design phase. So we hesitate to throw in numbers here that we're not necessarily going to be able to fully support. But these are your greenhouse gas reductions. This is the savings you can hope to achieve, and it'll tell you more or less if you have potential. Of course, the one I selected has 9 million square feet of available space, so it was kind of a sure thing that a geothermal system could be installed there. But you see what you get here. Just a couple other details. I'm not sure if I went into this, but you know, we have a monthly energy savings that you can anticipate also in there. I might, let me see if I can, I'm pretty much at a wrap here. I think if we want to move into questions early.
So no, actually, we have a last presentation and then we'll move into questions. So thank you so much, Tristan, that's helpful. I captured a bunch of questions for you specifically, but I think that I'll just kick it back to Harleen to wrap us up and share that last slide and say thank you to everyone for their presentations, and then we'll go into Q&A.
Thanks, Maria, and thank you, Tristan, for that insightful demonstration. I think Dave and you have given some fantastic examples where this tool could be used, and geothermal is a great fit. The tool will surely help our states building developers, owners, managers to explore geothermal for our building stock. I'm Harleen Srivastava, and I'm the project manager for the Commercial Clean Heating and Cooling Department at Sustainable Westchester. With the support from NYSERDA, my team helps build back better for a cleaner, more resilient and healthier New York. We offer one-on-one consultations, aggregate resources, and connect business and property owners, developers with ways to maximize the use of clean heating and cooling solutions. We also organize events and meetings with key partners to share marketplace information and intelligence. My contact information is listed at the bottom of the slide, so feel free to reach out with any questions about transitioning away from fossil fuels, adopting cleaner heating and cooling technologies, and making the most out of the programs and incentives from the state and from our local utilities. I'd also like to point you out to our website, check it out, where you can see case studies, our clean Conversations in Clean Energy podcast, and some other resources. With that being said, I think it's time to move on to the question and answer session.
Yes, we're very excited and ahead of the game. So thank you everyone for presenting, and we are so appreciative of you all sharing your experiences and expertise. And we of course are thrilled for so many of you would have joined us today. So there were a bunch of questions that have come through. Some have been asked and answered. There were a few that may have already been asked and answered, though, that I might toss out to the group again, only because I think they're fairly relevant for everyone. And if you're not following the chat, it might be hard to sort of follow the bouncing ball, if you will. So there are a few general questions. One was for Warren, and it's the question was, what if you have multi-adjoined buildings, each with a different address? And that will that be removed into a bigger project, or how does that work? And
yeah, so for adjoined buildings, they're often, at least the building footprint data set we got, it would often consider them as one building, one kind of big long building, even if there are different addresses for it. So that should work okay, with the big assumption that it is in the same parcel. If the parcel boundaries, if it was one big long building from the building footprint, because you can't see any break, that kind of data set is developed from aerial imagery, and it's not getting into the address specific breakups. But if the parcel boundaries were to break up individually for those, then the tool wouldn't be able to consider the replacement of one building within multiple parcels, if that makes sense. Because that whole, the whole available space for closed loop is a kind of pre-baked calculation. It's not something that can be changed on the fly in the current version of the tool. If you were to say draw in a new building footprint or something like that, or change your building size to try and get at a larger building rather than a lot of small ones. So yeah, again, I think that could work by altering with the data inputs in the results page some, assuming that you're not dealing with multiple parcels is the key there.
Gotcha. Okay. Thanks, Warren. This was a general question that was in the chat early on, and anyone who wants to jump in on this would be great. Where will the piping for ground source heat pumps be in urban areas with little green space? Anyone want to talk to that?
I could take that one, Maria.
Thanks, Dave.
Sure. The piping that's used to connect these ground heat exchangers is usually networked together. And the network of piping is generally buried at about 4 feet, which is usually deeper than most utilities. And it's usually placed to meet setback requirements from specific utilities, different setback requirements for different utilities. But they can go beneath asphalted parking lot areas, beneath gardens, beneath sidewalks, hardscape, with just some recommendations that your designer should be, I guess, conscious that there could be changes and there could be key areas that you want to stay away from for future use, or it could be within the footprint of the building itself. So there are, I guess, options that designers use to reduce or eliminate the risk of the infrastructure being, I guess, inadvertently damaged.
Great. So then there's another question that just came through, which I think might be worth having also, maybe you, Dave, jump on this, but what is assumed to be the life of a geothermal system to calculate the ROI? And what happens when the ROI exceeds the actual life of the ground source heat pump?
Yeah, we do a lot of this, ROI calculations and estimates. The interior equipment has an expected useful life of between 20 and 25 years, and that's established through ASHRAE and the Public Service Commission. The ground loops are expected to have a design life of 100 years. The manufacturers of the piping material provide a 65-year warranty. So it's sort of like kind of forever, and most people expect there will be a technology that exists that far down the road that'll replace everything that we use today. And yeah, if the ROI is too long, it's too long. You know, I guess then you are probably comparing against hopefully an air source heat pump solution or some other electrification solution.
Yeah, so Tristan, actually, do you want to answer those same questions just a little more definitively as it relates to this tool specifically?
Yeah, so specifically for this tool, and I agree with everything Dave just said, but specifically for this tool, we used a 25-year payback as the kind of the limit for the giving a thumbs up for the job. So the assumption is the ROI is based on over a 25-year period, and the tool, if you're not going to make that 25 years, that's when it tells you that it may not be a good solution.
I'll just reinforce something that I said earlier. This is Scott Smith at NYSERDA, that the tool is an initial look for people. It's like how, you know, sort of get an idea of what might be good for your building. We then have a free screening that's like a desktop screening. Someone will call you, they'll collect information about your energy bills, and they'll provide you with a 7 to 10 page report that goes to the next level of detail without visiting the property on how electrification could fit in your building. And that would include both air source and ground source. So Dave mentioned, if you're not, you know, if your building is a good fit for ground source, maybe look at air source. And then we hope many of those customers will then go on to actually work with an engineer to do a cost shared site specific feasibility study where an engineer would come on site. And you really can't make an investment decision until you've had that done at most large buildings. You need to have an actual engineer come out and give you, you know, and do a study.
So I also just wanted to mention something that went through in the chat and was asked and answered, but it might be a question that everyone had. The question was, is it possible to assume the ROI would be better than listed in the tool, since it appears that the tool is not showing rebates? And the answer was yes, in fact, that is the case. So in case those of you who were wondering, or might have the same question, you now know the answer to that. There was some question about split incentives, and maybe Scott, you want to just jump on that a little bit, and because I saw that you were one of the people in the chat who answered that question, and maybe give people context around what the question was, please.
Yeah, absolutely, I will. First, just let me say though that as it relates to incentives, as Will mentioned earlier, Con Edison provides those incentives. And when you're ready to learn what your incentives could be for your building, please contact Con Edison. Will also mentioned there's some tools that are available for large buildings to help them estimate those. And I'll just restate the answer. Absolutely, the return on investment is going to be better with those incentives than what's listed in this tool. So make sure you consider those. In terms of the split incentives issue, sometimes it's a little confusing because I was just talking about, you know, incentives coming from, you know, from Con Edison for projects. The split incentive, as it's usually referred to, is actually means that, you know, is referring to the fact that landlords are responsible for making the infrastructure investment or putting in the heating and cooling system in their buildings. And if they have tenants, typically their tenants are paying the energy bills. So where a building owner who owns their heating and cooling system and pays the bills for it has a natural benefit. You know, there's this return on investment we've been talking about, right? Where they, you know, they would put down an investment in a new high efficiency heating and cooling system, and they would save money over time. And, you know, as Tristan was showing earlier, for large buildings that could add up to millions of dollars over the life of the system. In the case of landlord-tenant situation, that may not be the case. And so there's a few things that can be done to address that. One that I didn't mention, but Danielle did, and thank you very much, Danielle. There's an opportunity to incorporate green lease provisions within leasing that will allow for sharing of those benefits. A landlord could own the ground source heat pump system and charge its tenants access to it. And you can do that in a way, you could do that as a landlord in a way that still gives the tenant energy savings, but allows you to recoup your investment. And I also made the point that going forward, especially the closer we get to, the climate goals, I made 2 points. One, as things go forward, there's going to be a demand for green space and for space that's served with clean energy. And not carbon emitting. And I think that's a benefit that landlords will accrue, and they'll either be able to lease their space more readily, or they'll be able to lease it for more money. And eventually there'll be mandates that come down. And it's often less expensive or more beneficial for building owners to do things before a mandate is issued than have to rush to comply with a mandate once it is issued. So hopefully that's, and I hope I would actually ask anybody else on the panel if they want to add anything to that.
Scott, I'll add a couple of things. I mean, there are also different kinds of triple net leases that we're talking about. There might be a building with multiple tenants, which is a little bit stickier than if you have, for instance, a ground lease where you have a developer or a property owner which just leases out a property or a building to one tenant. And in that case, it's just a question of who the target audience is. In that case, it's actually the tenant who you'd have to do the sales job to. And I think if that works, then the discussions with the landlord would be somewhat easier. I also am hearing a lot of discussion around ROI, and that becomes a little bit sticky when you get out past 15 or 20 years because of present value discounting and the discount rates that you use, because any savings that's 20 years in the future is going to look relatively paltry when you discount it back to the present. Perhaps the more salient discussion is payback period, whether you're going to get a zero payback within 6 years or 8 years or 10 years or something like that. And for businesses making capital investments, if you're talking about a payback period which is in the 5 to 7 year range, that still is somewhat attractive as opposed to a payback period which goes out 15 or so years.
If I could add something on a practical note, this is Clara Schepper from Flux Tailor. We were involved in the initial design and some of the property data processing for the tool. So currently the tool assumes collective energy usage for both owners and tenants per square foot annually for different building types. And it could be extended to also distinguish between owner and tenant paid energy. And I think any follow-up analysis will include a differentiation between the two. So I just wanted to add that it was considered, but it would of course have made things more complex. We currently wanted to keep the tool very accessible and so included a limited set of features.
One other thing I'll add about the ROI, the assumption of a 25-year payback period is probably based on useful life assumptions that have a lot to do with amortization schedules or depreciation schedules, and very often the technology or the equipment outlives that schedule. So you could put something in that, even though you're talking about a 25-year amortization schedule, could actually last 30 or more years. And that's the case with traditional heating equipment, for example.
Okay, thank you, everyone. There are two questions that basically relate to the tool in terms of this sort of a two-parter. What type of building is applicable, residential, commercial, multifamily, and what is the smallest building in square feet for which this tool and incentives are applicable? So I open it up to anyone who wants to jump in first, and then anyone who wants to add something, please feel free.
Yeah, so the tool considers all building types currently with no minimum square footage to get results in the tool. Incentives wise, that might be a different story, but I know the tool. Clark, go ahead. You have a point?
Yeah, it's actually 200 square feet, the cutoff. We did make a decision because otherwise we would have had some
Sheds and
very inaccurate results. And I,
thank you.
exactly. So anything beyond that we considered. Yeah.
Yeah, and I'll just jump in unless Will wants to. Is Will? I'm not sure if Will was able to stay beyond 1 o'clock, but
Still here. Yep.
yeah, you want to just address the incentive question? What types
Yeah,
of
sure.
are eligible for incentives?
Yeah, absolutely. I saw there was a follow one about the NYPA piece too. So just in summary, there are heat pump incentives for all types of customers, right? We don't make a distinction, residential, multifamily, CNI, which is commercial, industrial, or small to medium business. It's really to all customer segments. The primary eligibility criteria we use is an electric utility account, right, as defined by those under the state, right? So for Westchester, the only eligibility requirement is if you have an active Con Edison electric account. I understand that there are a lot of customers that don't have that and instead have a NYPA account directly. This is very prevalent for municipal customers. At this point, I don't know if I can address the piece about getting the NYPA to also offer incentives, but just for clarity, right? This New York State Clean Heat program is being administered from the state, right? The Public Service Commission has asked the private electric utilities to implement this in terms of offering and funding these incentives. Maybe Scott, I'm not sure if that's something you or the NYSERDA partners can reach out to your sister agency and have a discussion with NYPA on. Maybe that might be the best approach there.
Yeah, well, I guess I'll say NYPA does support geothermal, and they're in line with the Climate Act goals the same way we are. As Will was mentioning, just they don't charge the SBC, which means the customers don't pay into the pot of funds that fund the incentive programs. But they do have things that they will help a customer of theirs with assessing and implementing geothermal. They have, they're able to provide engineering assistance and do basically like a performance contract or a design build type project with financing for their customers. So if you're a NYPA customer, you can contact Harleen at Sustainable Westchester, and she can get you in contact with the right people at NYPA to investigate a project and support for projects.
So in that same regard, there are some specific questions in the chat that are, I'm guessing, very singly perhaps focused on what individuals might be looking at in terms of their current building stock. So we will make sure that we read through the chat after this and try to get back to you and connect you with some of the right resources and some of the folks who can answer your specific questions. I see a few of them have been answered and some contact information shared in that regard. So that should kind of work out if we can connect you with the right people. There is a question somewhere early on about retrofits as opposed to new building stock and the complexities of retrofits. So if anybody wants to, in terms of geothermal, if anybody wants to talk about that in general, or we can just connect someone with the right folks so that they can talk about their specifics for their building.
Let's see, yep. Yes, I mean, there's a lot of different current systems in place that have varying degrees of complexity. And I saw that question up there regarding the co-op. Different current solutions are have differing degrees of compatibility, but everything can be converted. At some point, to have this geothermal system, you do have to have some kind of riser going up the system. So if you're in some kind of co-op that just has a PTAC with local electric heating and cooling, then you're going to have to be putting in risers, which is going to be something invasive. So yeah, there's kind of a limitless amount of solutions and problems that would be part of a second and third phase of the analysis.
Right, and to Scott's point, this and the point that Tristan just made, this is really the first phase of the analysis. So And Harleen, have we missed any general questions or anything that we haven't covered in the chat? A lot of the questions were again asked and answered and seemingly more specific to individual situations.
Right, there are certain technical questions about loops and what fluid is being used. So if someone wants to answer those technical questions. So there's one from Pierre Freuden. What fluid is the loops? How do you prevent freezing? How do you determine how many loops? How deep are the loops? Is the soil type a factor in geothermal?
Yeah, Dave should take that. He gets all the short ones.
I'll try to do that quick. Generally, these loops are installed vertically between 300 and 500 feet deep for commercial applications. If the annual circulating water temperatures are expected to go beneath 45 degrees, then antifreeze is used. The antifreeze that's most common is propylene glycol, which is a food grade antifreeze. And were there more, or was that kind of a?
I think that was it. That was basically that specific question. And I think another, if we're going to get there, technical question in terms of retrofitting were about the steam and hot water systems non-compatibility and potentially compatibility or issues concerning air source heat pumps and conversion. So if anyone wants to take that question, that'd be great.
So that's kind of what I was driving at before, where it is going to get really complicated in case by case.
Okay.
And might be beyond. There was one question I saw in here where the question asked was, is it designed for anticipated ground conditions of thermal conductivity?
Oh, I missed that one. Okay, good.
And that brings up an interesting point, because there were some limitations to what we could do. When we were doing this tool for New York City, there was really one municipality. So we were able to dig into all of the particular areas where you don't have access to the system, where there's kind of a, maybe you're not really allowed to dig a well there. That for Westchester, we weren't able to incorporate because there were just too many of them running around to get them all in. So there is a chance that you know, you're on top of a reservoir, or you're on top of a pipeline feeding water into New York City, and you're not going to be able to dig a well there. That's going to come out in phase 2 or phase 3 that may not have been mapped in here.
I also want to say that we, Clara just dropped into the chat that some of the answers to the more technical questions about how the tool, excuse me, calculates things can be found in the methodology specification, and she dropped the link into the chat for that. So that might be helpful for a number of you. I also wanted to say thank you to, there were a couple of suggestions in the chat about maybe how the tool can be enhanced or added to, or and we welcome those suggestions. And Scott also invited anyone who had further suggestions to surely please reach out to us. You can reach out to Harleen and we can. I'm sorry, Jim, might you please mute if it's possible? Oh, am I allowed to? I don't have those controls. Anyway, Scott invited everyone to share their thoughts as well and any suggestions. And I think that he and Harleen can both take that information. So we can definitely drop Harleen's contact information into the chat. That would be great.
For personal, but I got to work on that machine, which is good. But
Okay, so I'm going to drop Harleen's contact information. Were there any other questions? Yeah. So do we think that we're at the end of our time? We are close to the end of our time, which is perfect. Imagine that. Does anyone want to conclude in in any way say any final thank yous beyond the one that I'm about to say? Scott, any final thank you or anything?
Well, yeah, I'm going to thank you, Maria and Harleen and Fiona and the rest of the Sustainable Westchester team, for doing all the logistics and pulling this event together and running a great event. I'll also thank Michael Romita for co-hosting and the rest of the speakers, and then I'll let you take it from there.
Great. And we, of course, want to thank NYSERDA and Con Ed and Michael and our new relationship with the WCA. We're thrilled about that and all of the amazing work here that's been done. And we hope that you'll all make use of the tool and, the adoption of clean heating and cooling solutions are a way to our clean energy future. So we are here, Sustainable Westchester, and everyone you've met and seen here today to help in any way we can. And everyone have a lovely and safe remainder of the summer. Try to stay cool. And thanks a bunch for spending your lunch hour with us.
Thanks, everybody.